The British Railway standard locomotive range had its fair share of pros and cons from an economical, ethical, and moral standpoint. Some say they were a short-term necessity that just so happened to be better made than they were intended to be. Others say they were a waste of money that could have gone straight to investment in electrification. Either way, BR built 999 standard locomotives across 12 classes and wheel arrangements over 9 years. Of these, 43 engines representing 8 classes have survived into preservation. With the eldest of these approaching 70 years old, it's nearly scary to think how far they've come and how they've aged. Indeed, some of them are older than some of the classes they've replaced. But what of those that didn't make it into preservation? Were they missed opportunities, or is it good that we saw the back of them? Let's start with the smallest of these, the Class 2 tank engines. There were 30 of these things built along the same lines as the Ivat Class 2 tank engines. The first batch of 20 were built at Crewe in 1953, and another 10 at Darlington in 1957. There didn't seem to be anything principally wrong with them, but with 130 of the Ivat equivalents already in circulation doing their kind of work, there didn't seem to be the need for the same engine with a different cab and separate numbering series. So they were darted back and forth between northeastern and southern regions, only to be made obsolete by dieselisation of their intended work. A batch of them was intended to replace the Adams O2 tanks on the Isle of Wight in 1965, but unfortunately electrifying the island lines with pre-war London Underground EMUs became the favoured option, so the class was made extinct by the end of the year. Useful they may have been, but they were simply too little too late. Moving up a notch, we have the Class 3s, both tender and tank versions. These were based around the Great Western Large Prairie boiler, adapted to take the regulator in the dome instead of the top of the barrel, creating perhaps the most oddly proportioned of the standard range. Only 20 of the moguls, based around the standard 4 mogul chassis, were built at Swindon in 1954, mostly being allocated to Scotland and North East England. One was sent to the southern region in later years, but the engines didn't quite fit in. Their axle loading was only 16 tons, so theoretically they were better suited for secondary routes, but work in these areas usually required the next size up or the next size down. So with none of these finding their niche, all were withdrawn between 1965 and 67. So the Class 3 moguls appeared to be misfits. The tanks fared a little better, but were prematurely made surplus to requirements. There were 45 of these built between 1952 and 55, principally to handle services that were too heavy for the Class 2 tanks on routes that were too light for the Class 4 tanks. Unfortunately for them, British Rail also happened to upgrade some of the lines that these engines were intended for. These upgrades, including the introduction of stronger bridges and abutments, resulted in the heavier and more powerful Class 4 tanks being allowed to work on these lines. 25 of the Class 3 tanks were fittingly allocated to the Western region, and gained the Western distinction of being painted green during overhaul at Swindon. It was common to find some of these working on the Cambrian lines, and even more common to find them on empty stock workings around London Waterloo. But these were tasks where the 4s proved superior, and so the class was more or less made redundant by BR's overthinking and eventually made extinct by 1967. And then there were the Class 6 Pacifics. These were basically slightly shrunken Britannias with smaller boilers to allow wider route availability. The Britannias weighed nearly 94 tons, whereas the Clans were 7 tons lighter and had an axle loading of 18 tons and 1700 weight. So less than a castle and even less than a standard 5, which happened to be nearly 11 tons lighter. 10 were built in 1951 and 52, with 5 being allocated to Glasgow and the other 5 allocated to Carlisle. Their tractive effort was £27,520, so roughly in the same league as the Halls and the Jubilees. Construction of a further 15 was intended in 1954, but a number of reasons stacked against them. One of them being inadequate drafting, the same fault that halted development of Duke of Gloucester, so unless they were thrashed, they would barely work at all. Railway historian C.J. Allen described them as one of the least distinguished in their performance of all the British standard locomotive types. Indeed, when number 72009 Clan Stewart was pitted against the Britannia on Great Eastern trains out of Stratford Shed, the Clan couldn't match the Brit. The class didn't receive the same degree of vigorous testing that the other standard types got, even though said testing was intended for them. In service, though, they were believed to be quite reliable, racking up an average of 269,000 miles between heavy general repairs. But perhaps the biggest reason that stacked against them was BR's modernisation plan, which halted construction of any new express steam locomotives after existing orders had been fulfilled. Although British Rail were convinced to rebuild the bullied Pacifics to a new-ish design, That was more of a rectification program, seemingly intended to last for the short term. In the end, the clans bumbled on until August 1966, with the last ones being broken up at Carlisle-Kingmore. So none of these classes are represented in preservation. At the moment, ongoing projects are aiming to build a new Class 2 tank, Class 3 tank, and a clan. Just no Class 3 mogul. I guess they must have been the runt of the litter. In anticipation of the success of the A1 Steam Trust, the 1990s saw the establishment of the Clan Project and the 82045 Steam Locomotive Trust. Bottom-end work on both engines has progressed well, but the Clan Project have faced setback after setback, forcing what's been built of the locomotive to be moved around a few times. The 3MT tank, based at the Severn Valley Railway, has fared much better, with most of the bottom-end work completed by 2020 and fundraising for the boiler well underway. But even before these two were conceived, the chassis from a standard 2 Mogul was acquired from Barry Scrapyard, but not for restoration in its own right. Over the decades, number 78059 has gradually been worked on at the Bluebell Railway to become the 31st member of the Class 2 tanks, number 84030. The necessary frame extensions were completed around 2011, but work has been slow ever since. Completion dates for all three of these projects have been harder to set in stone than a wet mud house, but if you wish to help them along, then you can follow links in the description to each project and perhaps place a few coins in their donation boxes. But is there a need for these types? Regarding the Class 2 tank, there's ample pre-war and pre-grouping equivalents that enthusiasts are likely to be more interested in, although the age that some of these are reaching may entail something younger to help them out from time to time. The Class 3 tank? Similar scenario, as the Severn Valley could use it to supplement both Great Western Prairies, the Ivet Mogul, the ugly Ivet Mogul, and both existing Standard 4s on the line, which are both more than 60 years old by now. Although with such a long run usually requiring a bigger machine, it may be limited as to how much it could pull. At the risk of being unpopular, the clan is probably likely to be the biggest misfit. It would certainly be a nice thing to see, and if the drafting can be sorted out, it could well be a capable performer. But railway preservation is slowly moving away from the mindset of wouldn't it be nice, and moving towards a reality check. The problem with the clan is that train loads on heritage railways are either too heavy or too light to warrant such a locomotive. It could supplement the Jubilees on the main line, but that's if it can find the work once it's finished. With the completion date for the engine forever slipping further and further away, mainline steam groups are forever facing more challenges over pathing, safety equipment and expenditure to keep their locomotives on the big railway. The network is already regarded to be at its capacity, and the high-speed lines are forever getting faster with more trains on them. Even rail freight services can be faster than steam runs. So, I dunno, if the clan gets finished, would it be too late to reach its full potential? Answers on a postcard, I'd say. To any representatives of all these projects who may have stomached enough patience to glance at this editorial, seriously, all the best of luck to you. But in a world when a single case can lead to a global pandemic that halts all but the most essential of actions, it seems that reality can really bite where it hurts the most when it really wants to. I'm Chris, and I'm here to gauge the issue.